You know, people seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth.
You're here because you know something, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Truth is stranger than lies. From deep inside the rabbit hole, here's your host, David Weiss.
Welcome to episode number 3 of Truth is Stranger Than Lies. I'm Patricia Steere.
And I'm David Weiss.
Well, today we're going to talk about one of our pet subjects, one of our favorite subjects, and probably one of the craziest subjects that you've ever heard discussed. And that subject is the flat earth.
Now, don't tune out because it sounds insane, because that's exactly what Patricia and I did when we first heard about it. For months and months, people were telling us about this, and we laughed at them, and we refused to look. So just hear us out, and you will be amazed if you listen.
We have a special guest with us today who's been doing YouTube videos for quite some time. And, he goes by the YouTube name of themorgile. So we welcome to our show, John. John, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How you doing, Patricia? David?
We are great. And, you have a very insane belief, and we share it. The earth is flat. Tell us a little bit about how therapy's going for you and the straitjacket.
How is it possible that the earth is flat? I mean, it's ridiculous. We all have seen Google Earth. We've seen the curvature of the earth. You know, if it's flat, where's the edge? How come people don't fall off?
Right. Yeah, no, and y'all are exactly right. Probably about 6 months ago, a friend of mine, I've always been sort of, conspiratorial minded, and my friend isn't. And so we always have major disagreements with things like 9/11. And he's like, well, you don't believe the earth is flat, do you? He said it sort of in jest. And I said, well, no. It never really even occurred to me. And honestly, I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And that conversation was what actually led me to start looking at it really from the angle of, okay, I'm going to debunk this nonsense right quick, right?
Exactly what I did.
When you start looking at the evidence and you start looking at, your observations throughout your entire life, things start to, sort of pop into place and click that didn't really have a solid explanation in the globe Earth or heliocentric view of the world.
The one thing that, people will look at, they will sense things and see things, and the problem is you have confirmation bias. I think that's what it's called, where we've been programmed to say the earth is a ball. So when we look out from great heights, either from an airplane or top of a mountain, we see a big flat circle because you can see the same distance in every direction, and then our mind says, oh, that's a ball. And it's not a ball, it's just a big flat circle. Right.
Well, and modern airplanes, they have concave, or I guess it would be convex windows, sort of bubble-shaped convex windows, and that does add to the illusion. But right, the horizon is always an equidistant circle around you. And so regardless of altitude, if we lived on a sphere, the horizon should drop when you're like 40 miles in the air in a weather balloon, but it never drops. It always stays at the same level, which sort of proves right there that it's not a sphere.
Well, go ahead, Patricia.
Do you find that that when you bring the subject up among friends of yours, family members, that they will listen to what you have to say about it, or do they just sort of shut down, based on the confirmation bias that we just talked about, and seeing videos and pictures of the International Space Station and all the NASA reports that are out in the media? Do they just look at you like you're crazy, or are there a few that will listen?
I think there's been one person that I just mentioned this to that was like, oh, wow, that makes sense, sort of the first time hearing it. But that's maybe out of, I don't know, if you count the people that I've, chatted with on my YouTube channel, I've probably talked to thousands of people about this, and 9 out of 10 people will try to, argue against it, refute it, but most of the points that you can argue which prove a sphere are actually sort of misunderstandings. And, it's sort of a debate that needs to be had, or maybe can never be won one way or another, as to whether this thing is a long series of lies or just a long series of misunderstandings, or maybe a combination of the two. But there's a lot of misunderstandings involved for sure.
Well, John, it seems like you have a lot of people, maybe not in your personal life, but like David and I, in our internet life and online life and video life, you have a lot of people who do agree with you. You have probably about, at last count, over 8,000 subscribers to your YouTube channel, and it's growing all the time. And David and I both have sort of, similar growth pattern in what we're doing. More and more people are waking up. So even if we don't know people personally who we can hang out with who believe the earth is flat, there are many, and we are all connected, and we're all kind of marshaling forces and doing this thing and bringing it to critical mass. So I do appreciate what you're doing. You've got videos right now that are very easy to watch because they're 15 minutes in length. They're like little bites of information, and I think it's a really great format that you're doing.
Oh, well, thanks. Actually, yeah, that was forced on me.
Yeah, I was going to say that. He got some strikes, and he's limited to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I pointed out that that's going to be a blessing because
yes,
you could make some short videos, and that's what I do.
Well, the strikes were actually lifted, though. That's the great thing about it. The first strike I got was from the producers of the Art Bell Show for my remix of that debate, which I wasn't paid for. I didn't sign my, the rights to my voice over, copyright ownership over to them. So they really didn't have a case. And the remix, that I did was well within the Fair Use Act laws. And so they were just sort of abusing YouTube's copyright protection system. And so I did end up appealing that, and YouTube did they made the correct decision, and they removed the strike. The second strike I got was from a flat earther named Paul Chieft, and you guys probably, if you haven't heard of him, you've definitely seen his animations because he does some great 3D renderings and animations of the flat stationary model. He had the reason Paul had done a copyright strike was he was just sort of fed up with people who were using his animations and misrepresenting his work. And so he was just sort of blanket copyright striking everyone. But I emailed him, and we went back and forth in a couple emails, and we're buddies now, and he lifted that strike. So it's all good on that. Yeah. And what was the first point you made?
That you've got these nice short videos, and of course the reason being because of some copyright strike stuff.
Yeah, so there was a period for, a month or so where I was limited to 15-minute videos, which are a lot easier to make. You can make it in a few hours, upload it in a couple of hours, and so that's a lot easier, and you can crank them out quicker. But I'm just sort of typically long-winded, especially if most of the videos that I do, I type out the narration and edit it first and then read that. So, that was 30 pages, I think. The last one I did in 6.5 hours. I couldn't even render it in one section. So yeah, the 15-minute ones are good, but that's that was sort of forced on me.
So let's get into some of the people that are hearing this for the first time. Like, this is absolutely crazy. How could you say such a thing? Let's talk about some specific things. You mentioned the horizon always rising at eye level. So if for those of you that haven't thought about this, on a flat plane, the higher you go, that horizon is going to shoot out as far as your eye can see and meet the sky at eye level, versus a sphere where the higher you go, the farther over the curve you're going to see, and that horizon should drop down. One of my favorite things to do is, I believe Eric Dubé pointed this out, you can just get two sawhorses, or just prop up a 2x4 or a board, put a level on it, get it level with the horizon down on the water, or from any height, on a mountain, down on the water, as long as you just have unobstructed view. Once you get it level, you line your eye up with the top of that board, and it will be perfectly aligned with the horizon. Impossible on a sphere.
Yep.
Also, there's all these videos that we get from NASA and from other concerns that show a curve, but it's in a picture or a video, it's done with the GoPro, the fisheye lens. So like the Red Bull jump, people have seen outtakes of that or seen the whole thing. And when he was inside the cabin, you could see a curve. You could see it straight. The horizon was straight, and then when he stepped out, they started utilizing the GoPro fisheye lens, which rounds everything, and of course they take a still shot from that with the round fake globe looking image, and then everyone just it reconfirms without saying a word that we live on a ball, and that was done on purpose, I'm sure.
They never even claim that is saying that the Earth is that's the curvature of the Earth. They just let us assume it. Did they in that video say, "Wow, he's up so high, you can see the curvature"? Or did they just leave that up to us to determine? Do you know?
And you're talking about the Red Bull jump at like I think it was 100 something thousand feet.
Yeah.
And those were definitely fisheye lenses. It's obvious once you're looking for it, and even I guess as a globe earther, it would be pretty obvious that was a fisheye lens. Otherwise, we'd be living on a small ball. And so, I don't know if they leave it up to your imagination. I mean, there's the curve of the Earth, and if you're indoctrinated in this belief system your whole life, you don't question it. Why would you question it? It's a globe, right?
What's your favorite way to get the flat Earth across to someone? Maybe number one or number two things that you could say, these are the reasons that it's flat.
Oh, it's just really observations. The thing that did it for me, and it doesn't really do it for most people, but when I was young, I was probably about 9 or 10, I took my first airline flight, which would have been from Florida to Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth. I went to visit my aunt. We went up to the Red River and took a shuttle run along the Red River, which is basically where you get dropped off and get in a canoe on one side. You ride the river downstream for, I think we did 3 days. So we camped out on the banks. And then you've got your cars and everything waiting for you at the other, at the bottom or whatever. So anyways, those flights, I was just sort of naturally expecting the flight to Texas to be a lot shorter than the flight from Texas back to Florida. It never occurred to me that the flights were, the same in duration. And I started asking, I asked my aunt, I asked my dad, I was like, well, how is that even possible? Shouldn't the westbound flight be a lot shorter than the eastbound flight? And they're like, oh, well, everything's spinning at the same speed before takeoff, because we're talking about the rotation of the Earth now, right? If the Earth is spinning east, then when the flight takes off from Florida going west, it's traveling in the opposite direction as the destination. So the two are coming towards each other. The plane going about 500 miles an hour west, and Dallas-Fort Worth coming towards the plane at almost 1,000 miles per hour east. So that should be a quick flight. I mean, you're talking like nothing once that plane gets going. So that was one thing that just sort of was explained to me, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't make much sense, but obviously it's true because we live on a ball, right? We always go with that assumption.
Jonathan, let's pick this up on the other side of the break, and I have a couple of points to make there. I spoke with some pilots on a recent flight, and their answer was comical. So we'll be back with Truth is Stranger Than Lies. Hang on.
On Top Network.
I like that. Check it out.
Welcome back to Truth is Stranger Than Lies. This is episode number 3, and I'm Patricia Steere.
David Weiss.
And we are here with the Morgile, John, who in our last segment was talking about when he was young, when he flew from Florida to Texas, that he had some issues regarding the plane times and flying. And that was one of the things that sort of alerted him early on to things not being what we've been told. So, John, pick it back up where you were when we left off. And I know, David, you've got something to add.
Yeah, and basically my point was made, and there are a lot of arguments to sort of explain this phenomenon away. The first one is everything is spinning at the same speed prior to takeoff, so it contains that eastward velocity for the duration of the flight, which is nonsense because the plane has jet engines attached, propelling it the opposite direction as the spin. So, my question is, at what point does it lose that eastward velocity? Never? Right? Because the laws of motion state that an object in motion will tend to maintain its velocity until enacted upon by some other force. Several jet engines would count as some other force, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, but the crazy people that believe in the spinning, wobbling ball Earth will say that you're moving at that speed, whether you're going with the spin of the Earth or not. Everything's traveling relative to that point on the land. So, like if you're at the equator and the equator spins about 1,000 miles per hour, it's about 24,000 miles around, 24 hours in a day. There's your 1,000 miles per hour. That when you're on the runway before you're even moving, you're moving 1,000 miles an hour. So when you take off with the spin of the Earth heading in the same direction that it's spinning, you're already going 1,000 miles per hour before you take off. And if you accelerate to 500 miles per hour, you're going 1,500 miles per hour compared to a point in space, but only 500 miles per hour over ground. Now, that's an argument that ball earthers and flat earthers can argue back and forth about forever, and everyone's going to hold on to their belief. But here's the question that I posed to pilots. I waited until I was the last one off the plane. Pilots are standing there, and I said, I pointed out just what I said. The Earth is spinning, this and that. I said, well, what if if you're at the North Pole, right on the North Pole, you're not moving at all because you're just spinning around in a circle every 24 hours on the axis of the Earth. So if you took off from an airport in northern Alaska or way up north, where you're only moving maybe 300 or 500 miles per hour, because the Earth is making a much smaller circumference there, and you fly down to the equator. So you've got that 300 miles an hour of spin. You accelerate to 800 miles an hour as to a point in space, 500 land speed. Then you get down to the equator. The Earth is going 1,000 miles per hour down there. How do you possibly catch up?
Right. That's a big issue, is north to south flights. And one of the examples that I used in one of my videos was I think it was like over Europe to South Africa. The plane starts off only traveling, supposedly traveling east with the spin of the Earth at like, say, 500 miles an hour or less, because it's way up in the northern hemisphere. That's it travels a lot shorter distance in 24 hours, supposedly, so it's going a lot slower. But that plane going from north to south would be sliding like 700 miles per hour westward by the time it reaches the equator, which we don't ever see. It doesn't happen.
Right. So their answer, the one pilot is like, I'm watching their eyes, they're darting all over the place. The stewardess leans over and goes, yeah, that's a good question, I'm interested. And so now they're all listening, and they're like, well, obviously it's magnetism, and that's why they call it the Great Northern Routes. And that was it.
Wow.
So the Earth is a ball. Magnetism and the Great Northern Routes. That's the best you could come up with. What does that even mean?
Yeah, I have no idea. Well, we're talking here on Truth is Stranger Than Lies with John. His YouTube channel is called The Morgile, and recently you've done a series of videos on satellites. And for those who are not flat earthers like David and I are, and you, John, who are just sort of new to this topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about those videos and satellites? Everyone will say, well, hey, you guys that are flat earthers say that nothing is launched into space, but satellites are up there. I've got my satellite TV and my GPS. What is your take on that, John?
Sure. And the U.S. government has apparently been faking space since as early as the 1940s. I found a video from 1946 that was supposedly a captured German V-2 rocket that the Allies launched and took pictures of the Earth from space. But basically, the horizon was flat in that, but they also faked the whole thing. If you look at the footage and sort of dissect it in slow motion, they're using models, and they sort of splice that in with real footage of high altitude, so it's a lot of trickery involved. But in terms of GPS and satellites, we can achieve, and as early as 1943 with Nikola Tesla's technology, we can achieve something similar to the internet and GPS with all ground-based tower systems, which were essentially Tesla technology that has been basically hidden from us.
Who's Nikola Tesla? I was never taught about him in school.
Right. Yeah, he was probably the greatest electrical engineer ever.
Written out of the history books and textbooks.
Yep, and it's funny because J.P. Morgan was the man who backed Thomas Edison, and they really did. They put a lot of effort into ridiculing and discrediting and basically ruining. They burned all of his stuff, just ruining Nikola Tesla, where he died penniless, alone, and didn't have any sort of credit for all of the achievements that he brought, which were basically, radio frequency waves and everything modern you can think of in terms of telecommunications is thanks to Tesla. And he was of the mindset that he wanted his technologies and inventions to benefit everybody for free. But see, the people like J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers, they can't have that. They want to monetize nickel and dime everything, which to me is a travesty, but we've allowed it to happen. And it's funny, we don't necessarily have to go there, but J.P. Morgan is the same guy that made up the guest list to the Titanic. So there is a connection to that as well, which connects to the creation of the Federal Reserve. So J.P. Morgan was in it pretty deep, right there with the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and those guys.
The rabbit hole runs very, very deep. That's for sure.
So are you saying that there's no satellites in space?
Well, my grandfather was an engineer for the military for many years, and he actually, when he retired from the military, he went on to work another 25 years in the Pentagon. He was the chief engineer for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, for many years. And he told me all kinds of stories. Obviously anything that he would have to kill me after he told me. He didn't tell me that sort of thing, but he gave me enough information. He was telling me they were doing geostationary, weather balloon launches way back in the 40s and the 50s. And with geostationary weather balloons, which are very easy to achieve, you just launch a weather balloon and it stays put, basically. You can achieve the exact same things you can achieve with satellite technology, but you don't have the interference that's caused by the ionosphere and all sorts of problems of bouncing signals through our atmosphere, through space, and then back down through our atmosphere. There's lots of issues with that, but we can achieve the same thing: triangulation, GPS, telecommunications, with towers and geostationary balloons. Now, I just don't see the need for satellites when the military or the government has had this technology for 70 plus years. There's just no need for satellites. Furthermore, when we see the spectacle of Google Earth and the Google Maps, we can see very, very close-up pictures of even the houses and the lawns and everything. People think these are satellite pictures, and the advancements in those images are due to advancements in satellite technology. But I would rather believe, or it makes more sense to me, that it's our advancements in drone technology that has increased the resolution of those maps of realistic pictures.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say you couldn't achieve that from a satellite that's 300 miles away. There's no way in the daytime. This is an issue that I've been battling with. Our atmosphere is reflective in the daytime. You can't see the stars during the day because our atmosphere is totally reflective. So, how could a satellite out in space see through all of that reflective atmosphere and get see a gnat's butt from that altitude? It just doesn't make sense.
That is a great point. Point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got the Loran system, and we've got the Google Loons, the balloons going up, and so people say Loran was, put to bed and not used anymore. But it seems more like that the words GPS were, kind of slapped over the machinery, and it's called that instead.
The Loran system was based on radio towers, pre-cell phone towers, and I used it when I was a kid out on my boat. And basically, it would just give you two multi-digited numbers. You'd look on a chart, and it would put you accurately right where you are. So then computers came out. They just put a computer graphic overlay on it and said they called it GPS. What you'll notice with GPS, if you are in the middle of a country that has very poor cell phone service, your GPS will go out also. And if GPS was real, it would work everywhere. And every time somebody launches a weather balloon to go up and see, what they see, it loses the GPS signal as soon as it gets any altitude, when in fact it should be getting a better signal. Doesn't make any sense at all.
I live in Houston, and I'm close to downtown Houston, lots of tall buildings. And when I drive there, my quote unquote GPS goes out, and the GPS wouldn't go out if it were satellites up in the air, because it wouldn't be blocked by buildings, because they would be above the buildings. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for things are done on the ground, triangulated and such, as you've said, John.
Yeah, it's pretty common knowledge that if you're using a cell phone, you are getting reception from 3 nearby towers. That's how it works. And you're always going to be closer to one tower or another, and that's how they triangulate position. Satellites aren't necessary. People, have Dish TV, like Dish Network or whatever. They got, you got that generic plastic little dish that's supposedly pointed at a geostationary satellite. That doesn't make any sense. It makes a lot more sense that they're simply tapping into a Tesla-based, ground-based communication system, which, we've had that technology for 70 years, and there's absolutely no need whatsoever for satellites.
That's John the Morgile, and you're listening to Truth is Stranger Than Lies, and we'll be back. Welcome back to episode number 3 of Truth is Stranger Than Lies, and I'm Patricia Steere.
And I'm David Weiss.
Our guest goes by the name of The Morgile. That's his YouTube channel. It's MORGILE. His name is John, and we're talking about, flat Earth. David and I, we have a penchant for talking about it because we do believe the Earth is flat, and we invite you to research it yourself. And I know that you'll come to the same conclusion because it's the only conclusion. And John is of the same mindset.
I used to believe, based on unsubstantiated information, that the Earth was a ball, but now I know it's not a ball and it's flat.
Well, John's got some interesting new developments in his life and on his YouTube channel. He has a flat Earth mobile, and if you go to his YouTube channel, you can find a video on that. John, tell us about what this is all about and what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, sure. There's a auto body shop. Like I can literally throw a rock at it from my house between here and the store that I walk my dog up to a lot. And there was a big diesel bus parked up there that was for sale. And so I talked to the owner of the shop about it, and it belonged to a church youth group that it broke down on them or something. I think it overheated, and so I still haven't taken it to a diesel mechanic. I've just about paid off the title on it, but the guy, I don't think he was a pastor. He just worked for the youth group, but he agreed to sell it to me for $500, which is what he was going to get for it for scrap. And it's just parked at my house until I'm finished paying it off, which I'm almost done paying it off. Once I have the title on it, I'm going to have it taken over to a diesel mechanic and see what's wrong with it. But the reason that I wanted it so bad is because it's a diesel. And a lot of people don't know that you can run a diesel engine without any modifications. The diesel engine was designed to run on peanut oil, or you can take slightly modified or processed fryer grease and run a diesel on that. So that's why I've been wanting a diesel for a long time, is just to experiment with that and showcase that. And since it's a giant, huge bus, then I figured, hey, might as well advertise some proofs or truths of the flat Earth. It'll be the Flat Earth Mobile.
Yeah, you could, have bumper stickers you hand out, information, brochures, a bullhorn. The Earth is flat.
I'm thinking along the lines of either airbrushing it or vehicle wrapping it, just depending. But the first thing is I need to own it, which I'm almost painted off. Then I need to get it running, and then after that, I'll worry about the exterior and what I'm going to end up doing with it. It's probably going to take a while, but it's always nice to have a goal, because this life can be so treacherous and monotonous. Sometimes it's nice to have something to shoot for. So,
all right, John, that sounds like fun, and we'll keep track of the Flat Earth Mobile. We were talking before the break about satellites and the fact that they're mostly using just hot air weather balloons. And if you think about it, on a flat Earth, it makes perfect sense. You get it way up, above any of the moving air currents, and it's going to stay pretty stationary. There's been a couple of flat earthers that have launched some balloons, and the amazing thing is they go up, to great heights, and then they land just a few miles from where they took off, which would be kind of impossible on a rotating ball.
Yeah,
Right.
and why would Google launch these Google Loons, these Google balloons, to keep track of what's going on Earth when they had satellites? I mean, there would be absolutely no reason for them to waste the money for it.
That's right. Yep.
So that brings us to, well, if there's not satellites, what's up with the International Space Station? I actually saw it. I have a tracker on my iPhone twice about a week ago. It came by, and I watched it shoot across the sky. What am I seeing there, John?
Yeah, there's definitely something up there. Whether or not that's what we're seeing when we watch, because Jaron, I don't know if you guys know, Jaronism and I watch the ISS feed every Tuesday night on Jaronism's channel live, so check that out. But yeah, when you watch the feed from the ISS, there's a lot of weird anomalies, discrepancies, very strange, so it's interesting to watch. But so what are we seeing in the sky? That's a good question. There appears to be something up there, but the problem I have with it is if it's say the size of a football field, if it's supposedly 250 or so miles away, that thing shouldn't even be visible at all, even if there was light bouncing off of it.
Correct. And so what I saw was a very bright light, kind of looked like Venus would look, if it was moving at a tremendous speed. So I'm thinking that what we're seeing when we say we see satellites and the International Space Station is, if it's not a drone, it's something else. And I think it might be on the same category as planets, stars, satellites in the space station. They're all orbiting, and not orbiting a ball, orbiting over a flat plane for whatever their purpose is, and that's a longer conversation.
But you're kind of saying that it is a sort of natural body, or maybe made by some previous civilization, and that the NASA people have just named it Space Station, so they can point their finger at it and say, that's what that is up there.
They know its orbit, just like they know the orbits of planets, whatever they are, and they're not what they're telling us. Planets are not giant rocks in space, and this thing, looking at it, I caught it through a telescope actually for about a couple of seconds. It looked like a self-illuminating bright light.
Huh. Yeah, it's really strange. It really is. The model that I ultimately subscribe to, that there could be something physical up there. It doesn't necessarily mean there is something physical up there, man-made, or like you said, it could be something that already existed. We really don't know. But, the barometric pressure is what gives this our weight. So if you climb the top of a mountain, you're going to weigh a little bit less because you're higher up in the atmosphere. There's less stuff pushing down on you. So when you get up to a certain altitude, there really is no barometric pressure. So things do become essentially weightless at certain altitudes. So to me, it wouldn't be that hard to get something physically up there and set it into motion. And again, we're not orbiting a ball. We're just simply orbiting the magnetic center, which is fixed at the North Pole. And that would make sense because everything else in the skies appears to do that.
And so to sort of sum up for those who are not flat earthers yet, there is not a actual space station orbiting above the ball Earth with a with a crew on it, who are living day by day, breathing oxygen, doing experiments.
Drinking Tang.
Yeah, that's not what's happening, right?
People say, well, I've seen the interviews, where they're passing the microphone back and forth. But what you will never see in the history of all, NASA space travel, from the moon missions to the space station, when it appears that they're really in zero G, it's never more than 30 seconds without an edit. And then on these longer interviews, it's obvious that they're using green screen technology and hanging from wires. And one thing you'll never see them do is a do-si-do around each other. They'll never go around each other. They stay perfectly still. If they're going to do a flip, they do a forward or a backward flip, nothing sideways, because it doesn't work with the wires that way.
And there's no...
painfully obvious when you look for it and don't just believe.
And the fourth wall, they never show the fourth wall where the camera is coming from. They won't do a pan all the way around.
Never in the history of all orbiting outer space video footage has they done a 180, let alone a 360, and they can't because they're on a movie set at best.
Do you think, John, that they're in a base underground and using green screens and wires and such to film the fake space station? Where do you think that they're really doing this?
Yeah, it appears to me that it's all faked footage, and like Dave said, you can see any of the interior shots where they're sitting there yapping their mouths for 30 minutes. They're obviously sort of hanging on wires with green screens behind them. The spacewalks appear to be done inside a large, dark, huge pools where there's trick photography at work. But Patricia, I know you know Tiger Dan because I've watched your show with interviewing Tiger Dan, and he brought up some good points to where with the, not necessarily the Apollo astronauts, they were definitely lying, but modern astronauts could be tricked using simulators and existing technology. They could be tricked into thinking they went into space when actually they didn't ever go into space. With the exception of the ones that do spacewalks, that's obviously filmed in a pool. We've seen air bubbles in space, like you would in a pool. But yeah, so it's possible that not even the spacefaring astronauts are all lying. But me personally, I think that if you are an astronaut that's been into space, you're a liar. That's just my opinion.
I agree.
That is such an emotional pull of people. The moon missions and the space station and NASA. It's a very patriotic feeling, and people they engage their emotional brains, and when you say something like that, people just shut down. And I actually shut down when people said the moon landings are fake. I'm like, oh, you are insane. But if you take the time and look into this stuff, it's undeniable, and it's actually embarrassing that people ever even believe it.
Becoming a flat earther has a lot of issues that you go through after you've done the research and come to the conclusion. You do feel a sense of sadness that you had all these things, your heroes have been taken from you, and the things you grew up believing are false. But then after that initial feeling of depression is an intense feeling of euphoria because you're free of the lies. That's why I encourage everyone to look into the flat earth and don't just laugh at it, because it will free you. And once you're free, you're better able to understand the world in which we live. There are many puzzles and many issues that we've not yet been able to solve, but together, the more flat earthers join the party, we're going to be able to figure it out together.
So if you're interested in looking into the flat earth, I recommend two videos to start with. One is Flat Earth Clues by Mark Sargent. Just look for it on YouTube. It'll probably be the first hit if you put in Flat Earth Clues. And then another one is a new video of a book that Eric Dubay put out called 200 Proofs the Earth is Flat, or 200 Proofs the Earth is not a ball. What are they? 200 Proofs the Earth is Flat, I believe. You can't debunk any of them, where NASA gives us 10 proofs the Earth is a ball, all of which have been debunked.
Yeah, I think, and one point I was going to make earlier, is it's not really that difficult to prove the Earth is not a ball. The difficult part is just simply getting somebody to look at the evidence and consider it.
We are talking today on Truth is Stranger Than Lies, episode number 3, with John. He goes by the name The Morgile on YouTube, and we've also mentioned Jeranism. Look him up and watch some of his videos, and John is a co-host on some of the shows. So you'll be able to get more of John that way. We've got one more segment left in our show, and we'll be back in a bit and talk a little bit about, our favorite subject here on Truth is Stranger Than Lies, and that is the flat earth. Back in a few moments. Welcome back to the final segment of episode number 3 of Truth is Stranger Than Lies. And I'm Patricia Steere.
And I'm David Weiss.
We have our special guest, John, who goes by the name of The Morgile, M-O-R-G-I-L-E. That is his YouTube channel. If you look at YouTube videos, this is the one to look for. He's got a lot of great information, resources on the flat earth, so go subscribe to his channel if you have a couple of moments. And, John, you know somebody who's gotten themselves into quite a pickle over trying to share flat earth truth. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Sure, and I'm not going to mention any names or anything, but a friend that I've recently, started talking with on Skype, just recently met her, was actually institutionalized last weekend because she was trying to bring this topic or sort of bring this truth to her pastor, and her pastor ultimately got a restraining order on her, and then she emailed him or called him, and which ultimately was breaking the restraining order. And so, yeah, she was institutionalized for sort of professing to her pastor and I guess other people as well that the earth isn't a sphere. And so I guess the moral of that story to everyone is once you do finally, come to this conclusion and realize the truth, pick your battles, don't get yourself locked up. Certain situations, a lot of people are not ready to hear this. They won't consider it. They would just assume you mad before they can consider it. So just be careful. I guess that's how I would put it.
That is a good advice. When I told you about my conversation with the pilots, I never mentioned flat Earth. I just ask a question that disputes what's going on. I recently started talking to my personal friends where we'd be sitting at the beach and we had a perfect view of the skyline of Manhattan where I actually witnessed the towers turn into dust. Clear shot, clear day, and it's about 30 miles to Manhattan, and according to ball Earth math, you should not be able to see the shoreline, and you can see underneath bridges, and you shouldn't be able to see the top of those bridges based on the curvature of the earth. So I would just ask those questions. I was like, hey, you see that? I'm like, how come we can see that? And I talk about the calculations, and I never say flat earth, and then they come back later and they say, I was thinking about that, and they'll come up with some lame excuse, and you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. And it kind of been opening them up. And one of the friends I did that with, who's a smart guy, he's in the banking business, and he looked at me, he goes, I figured it out. He goes, the earth is flat. And I didn't even just clap or anything. I was just like, that's interesting. And we kind of just left it at that. But now, if you bring up flat earth, that was my favorite excuse. When I'm arguing with people about 9/11 or Sandy Hook or any of these other great deceptions, I'd say, you're such a moron, you probably think the earth is flat. And that is no longer in my arsenal of insults.
Right.
Well, I've done the same thing. I've tried to talk to people about flat earth and found it's best to leave the words flat earth out of it until you've got them understanding what you're talking about and then bring it in. John?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, in terms of the curvature, you can find pretty easily pictures, but you can see the cliffs of Dover from France, from Calais, France, which is 20.6 miles. And there should be a curvature of something crazy, like over 200 feet between Calais, France, and the cliffs of Dover. But you can clearly see that the water is a perfectly flat plane. It doesn't curve over an arc whatsoever. Just one of those good proofs.
In Eric Dubé's video and book, ebook that's free online, 200 Proofs the Earth is Flat, he shows video of islands that are 100 miles apart, where you can actually see them on a clear day and zoom in, there'd be over a mile of curvature in between these places. It's just unexplainable any other way. By the way, these videos, if you want a shortcut, on my website, deepinsidetherabbithole.com, on the top right is a link that says, Is the Earth a Ball? I have links to all the videos that we're talking about, links to the Morgiles page and other great flat Earth research pages.
And since you're plugging your thing, and we've already sort of plugged the Morgile, John's YouTube channel.
Show.
I've got a show too. Hey, we've all got shows on YouTube, and it's called Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. And if you can't remember that name, my name Patricia Steere, you'll find it. And I interview a lot of incredible flat earthers and all of the different things that they're doing. And John will be among them, and David has also been interviewed. And it's a real fun way to find out the behind-the-scenes story about how various people came to learn about the flat Earth. So check that out. It's a really it sounds like a crazy subject, and then we hear about people being locked up because of it. But it's actually a really fun and engaging subject, and one that will take hold of you and change your life.
So when you bring up the flat Earth to somebody, the first thing that jumps to their head, is what we were all shown in school, and everybody remembers it, that 3 or 4 masted ship going over the horizon, disappearing until the top of the mast is the last thing that you see. But if you watch that video, not only is the camera angle moving lower and lower as the ship goes farther away, it's just an illusion of perspective. I thought, John, maybe you can mention that a little bit, because I've watched ships go over the horizon, completely gone, and then I broke out a pair of binoculars, and there they were again. John?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's an optical illusion based on the natural laws of perspective. Everybody's sort of misinformed. Like, when you take art classes, they say that the vanishing point is a single point where all the parallel lines converge. Well, that's sort of wrong, because that's only for objects that are near to your line of sight. So if you're looking at the hull of a ship, which is closer to your line of sight, versus the mast of the ship, which is 30 feet above that, its vanishing point is a lot more distant than the hull, and it's basically what it is an optical illusion where the hull of the ship sort of merges with the horizon and the mast doesn't. And that's one of those misunderstandings that I was talking about that has sort of led people to believe that the Earth is a globe. But when you really do, look at the evidence and dissect each of those little proofs of a globe, it's very flimsy proof, and it's actually very easily debunked. But the problem is we've all been very thoroughly programmed to assume all of this as true and correct, and it's almost like a magic trick or a sleight of hand trick where people fail to see what's right in front of them based on their conditioning.
Well, you were mentioning, John, the cliffs of Dover being visible, and of course, somewhat recently in the news, we had the Chicago skyline as viewed from Michigan, and it was called by the weather reporter who was talking about it a superior mirage, when in reality, it was just being able to see the truth that the Earth is flat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and the thing is, those superior mirages are supposed to be inverted, so I didn't. Maybe it was a double mirage.
Mirage of the mirage. That's it.
Right.
That explains it. Well, the whole flat Earth thing has so many different ins and outs, so many different components, so many things that we're unable to touch on in a short period of time. But as we were talking about before, there are many videos that you can find, and I do want to make a correction to something that we said that we misspoke earlier. The Eric Dubé video is called 200 Proofs the Earth is Not a Spinning Ball. We were saying 200 Proofs the Earth is not flat. But if you put 200 proofs the Earth is flat into YouTube search, it'll bring up that same video. So either way.
And they're all linked on deepinsidetherabbithole.com. Is the Earth a ball? All
right. John, what's next for you? What have you got coming up video-wise? Is there anything that you're going to be working on? A new series of videos, topics?
Yep, I'm working on a video right now. Hopefully I'll be able to bang it out this weekend and start uploading by Monday, but at the latest it'll be next weekend. I'm always working on something, and I've never been so motivated until I came to this conclusion. I just hate lies, and I hate when people don't understand things but think that they do. And so hopefully, if I can, the thing that I've always said is if I can help one single person to realize the truth, or at least consider this and come to the conclusion, then that's mission accomplished. So
I do need to ask one more question before we kind of wrap things up, and that's your belief about the type of flat Earth that we are living on. Is it the type of flat Earth where it's an endless plane, or is it the type of flat Earth where we are living in an enclosed world where there is a firmament above us?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I guess I can tell you what I believe or what I've concluded and what the evidence shows, but really the best answer is we don't know. Beyond the southern regions, we really don't know because of the Antarctic Treaty. It's illegal for us to do a full sovereign natural geodetic survey of the southernmost regions, which is imperative. But based on the way that the military reacted and based on all of the treaties surrounding the southernmost regions, I just don't see the world's governments going to such great lengths to simply cover up the world being flat. If you get to a certain point and fall off the edge into space, it's sort of similar to the globe model because we're sort of trapped here. So I like to think of it more as we live in a small portion of an otherwise infinite plane, but until we're able to travel and really survey the southernmost regions, it's all sort of conjecture and the way we interpret the evidence.
Wonderful. John, thank you for spending your time talking with us. Once again, The Morgile is the name of his YouTube channel. And John, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Well, David, this has been fun. More flat earth talk here on Truth is Stranger Than Lies. And, well, I know you're a prepper, and I'm a prepper too, which means somebody who's preparing for the worst and living as if nothing bad's going to happen.
For the day when the world wakes up to the lies, it's not going to be pretty. People are going to rise up.
Yes, indeed. And of course, natural disasters happen too. If you're, anything could happen. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. Now, prepper supplies, of course, you can go to your local store and buy things, but we've got an idea that maybe you haven't considered yet. If you go on Talk Network to truth.talknetwork.com, that's truth.talknetwork.com, you can peruse a wide array of products that may help you kind of up your prepper game. What are some of the things on there, David?
There's all sorts of prepping supplies, natural supplements. It's tied in with Mike Adams' Natural News Store, along with some other unique items, and maybe we'll be adding some flat earth items to that soon.
That sounds like a very good idea. Flat Earth T-shirts, Flat Earth coffee mugs. I mean, the list is endless.
The problem with the Flat Earth coffee mug is you can't put anything in it. Water just comes right out.
Yes, exactly. Well, we've had a good time talking about the Flat Earth subject because, it's very near and dear to our hearts. Of course, all other sorts of conspiracies are too, like 9/11, Boston bombing, Sandy Hook. But this seems to be the capstone, as far as we're able to tell at this point. The one that really piques our curiosity because it's almost never ending. But we have to say goodbye for now. Make sure to check out what we spoke of earlier at truth.talknetwork.com. And any final words, David?
That is it. Everybody, we'll see you next week. Download the podcast on talknetwork.com. Take it with you. Share it with your friends.
All right. This has been Truth is Stranger Than Lies on Talk Network.
That was like, oh wow, that makes sense. Sort of the first time hearing it, but that's maybe out of, I don't know, if you count the people that I've chatted with on my YouTube channel, I've probably talked to thousands of people about this, and 9 out of 10 people will try to argue against it, refute it, but most of the points that you can argue which prove a sphere are actually sort of misunderstandings. And, it's sort of a debate that needs to be had or maybe can never be won one way or another as to whether this thing is a long series of lies or just a long series of misunderstandings or maybe a combination of the two. But there's a lot of misunderstandings involved for sure.
Well, John, it seems like you have a lot of people, maybe not in your personal life, but like David and I, in our internet life and online life and video life, you have a lot of people who do agree with you. You have probably about, at last count, over 8,000 subscribers to your YouTube channel, and it's growing all the time. And David and I both have sort of, similar growth pattern in what we're doing. More and more people are waking up. So even if we don't know people personally who we can hang out with who believe the earth is flat, there are many, and we are all connected, and we're all kind of marshaling forces and doing this thing and bringing it to critical mass. So I do appreciate what you're doing. You've got videos.
People seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inner truth.
You're here because you know something, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Truth is stranger than lies. From deep inside the rabbit hole, here's your host, David Weiss.
Welcome to episode number 3 of Truth is Stranger Than Lies. I'm Patricia Steere.
And I'm David Weiss.
Well, today we're going to talk about one of our pet subjects, one of our favorite subjects, and probably one of the craziest subjects that you've ever heard discussed. And that subject is the flat earth.
Now, don't tune out because it sounds insane, because that's exactly what Patricia and I did when we first heard about it. For months and months, people were telling us about this, and we laughed at them, and we refused to look. So just hear us out, and you will be amazed if you listen.
We have a special guest with us today who's been doing YouTube videos for quite some time. And, he goes by the YouTube name of the Morgile. So we welcome to our show, John. John, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How you doing, Patricia? David?
We are great. And, you have a very insane belief. And we
say the Earth is a ball. So when we look out from great heights, either from an airplane or top of a mountain, we see a big flat circle because you can see the same distance in every direction. And then our mind says, oh, that's a ball. And it's not a ball. It's just a big flat circle.
Right. Well, and modern airplanes, they have concave, or I guess it would be convex windows. Sort of bubble-shaped convex windows, and that does add to the illusion. But right, the horizon is always an equidistant circle around you, and so regardless of altitude, if we lived on a sphere, the horizon should drop when you're like 40 miles in the air in a weather balloon, but it never drops. It always stays at the same level, which sort of proves right there that it's not a sphere.
Well, go ahead, Patricia.
Do you find that that when you bring the subject up among friends of yours, family members, that they will listen to what you have to say about it, or do they just sort of shut down, based on the confirmation bias that we just talked about, and seeing videos and pictures of the International Space Station and all the NASA reports that are out in the media? Do they just look at you like you're crazy, or are there a few that will listen?
I think there's been one person that I just mentioned this to
right now that are very easy to watch because they're 15 minutes in length. They're like little bites of information, and I think it's a really great format that you're doing.
Oh, well, thanks. Actually, yeah, that was forced on me.
Yeah, I was going to say that. He got some strikes, and he's limited to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I pointed out that that's going to be a blessing because
yes,
you can make some short videos, and that's what I do.
Well, the strikes were actually lifted, though. That's the great thing about it. The first strike I got was from the producers of the Art Bell Show for my remix of that debate, which I wasn't paid for. I didn't sign my, the rights to my voice over, copyright ownership over to them. So they really didn't have a case. And the remix, that I did was well within the Fair Use Act laws. And so they were just sort of abusing YouTube's copyright protection system. And so I did end up appealing that. And YouTube did they made the correct decision and they removed the strike. The second strike I got was from a flat earther named Paul Chieft. And you guys probably, if you haven't heard of him, you've definitely seen his animations because he does some great 3D renderings and animations of the flat stationary model. He had the reason Paul had done a copyright strike was he was just sort of fed up with people who were using his animations and misrepresenting his work. And so he was just sort of blanket copyright striking everyone. But I emailed him, and we went back and forth in a couple emails. And
Chariots. The Earth is flat. Tell us a little bit about how therapy's going for you and the straitjacket.
How is it possible that the Earth is flat? I mean, it's ridiculous. We all have seen Google Earth. We've seen the curvature of the Earth. If it's flat, where's the edge? How come people don't fall off?
Right. Yeah, no, and y'all are exactly right. Probably about 6 months ago, a friend of mine, I've always been sort of, conspiratorial minded, and my friend isn't. And so we always have major disagreements with things like 9/11. And he's like, well, you don't believe the Earth is flat, do you? He said it's sort of in jest. And I said, well, no. It never really even occurred to me. And honestly, I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And that conversation was what actually led me to start looking at it really from the angle of, okay, I'm going to debunk this nonsense right quick, right?
Exactly what I did.
When you start looking at the evidence and you start looking at, your observations throughout your entire life, things start to, sort of pop into place and click that didn't really have a solid explanation in the globe Earth or heliocentric view of the world.
The one thing that people will look at they will sense things and see things, and the problem is you have confirmation bias. I think that's what it's called, where we've been programmed to